Mr. Bliss?
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Court, counsel, Mr. Thompson, members of the jury. Whenever I start one of these, I want to say how deeply grateful we are for your attentiveness and the work you've put in so far. It's been a long 2 weeks, and you've all sacrificed immense amounts to be here. That is not taken for granted. It's been a difficult process for now. I have a chance to present my arguments in the case of Derrick Thompson. And then you will retire with a great and heavy job. This packet of information constitutes the charges, the instructions, and then you will have to make a decision. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the inciting incidents here. Now, in some cases, you end up with small little events that, when seen with 20/20 hindsight, can be of great foreboding. Here, we have this rental receipt. $160 is what Hertz is getting for this vehicle for a week, a $70-some thousand SUV. With taxes total out of pocket for Mr. Thompson, it's $250. Hamburger prices and you're getting a steak. Now, evidence showed from Kenitra that this was really her car. When you listen to her, the call, she says, in the squad car, she says, "Baby, where's my car?" And Mr. Thompson says, "Your car, oh, my brother." That, I submit, gives you an idea of what is happening with this vehicle. There's this shared car. It's mostly the girlfriend's car. It's owned by my client's mother. But they've rented a car, and they paid for a sedan, and they're given a 6,000-pound luxury executive car they're fully unfamiliar with. It's this moment, right as this is coming in, fresh from being cleaned, ready to go. Mr. Thompson appears and is going to select his car. It appears it's the 5-star Hertz line. It may be a different class, but it's the pick your car lane. If this were in a movie, you'd have the realization that things were going to go wrong, because why else would this be here? Now, meanwhile, we have DeMarco Thompson there, swinging those keys around. It's really important that you look closely at those keys. These words on that little wooden flap, this key hanging there, whatever this piece of black plastic is underneath, and him swinging it like this, going back and forth. This evidence has been in here from day one. Still, the state refuses to even acknowledge the clear evidence in this case that there are 2 people in the car. And I think this is a good time to get into credibility of witnesses. Sergeant Dave Ligneal got on the stand and said the distance between this airport Hertz rent-a-car and the accident scene was between 12 and 14 miles. And it just so happened the odometer on this car said 13 miles. Now, the next day he got up on the stand and said, oh no, I map quested it. And I did that in October, and it was 10.7 miles. What that shows you is that when Dave Lignale has a reason to tell an affirmative falsehood, he does so. And he did so to you, and he did so on the issues of most importance of this case. Those are those keys. And the state has never acknowledged it and never conducted the basic investigation that would be required in this case. There's an old Latin phrase that is falsus in unum, falsus in omnibus. False in one thing, false in everything. It's a little bit like Cicero's fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And throughout Dave Lignale's testimony, you could feel that. The credibility of the head of this investigation, person detailed with the FBI, working for the Minneapolis police as well, is always like, well, I don't know, maybe. And then until he can be nailed down on something, he won't move. Think about that when he gave sworn testimony in October, right around the time he's Googling or map questing or going on GeoCities for the 10.7 miles. He gave testimony at that point that he thought it was 50-50 whether or not DeMarco Thompson was in that vehicle. 50-50. And this is the guy who's telling affirmative falsehoods, who's prevaricating about the basic fact of the distance between the rental and the scene of the crime. Now, the next credibility is the credibility of this man, DeMarco Thompson. Person with one of the most strong motives to give self-serving testimony I've ever encountered in a case. Who on earth would want to be associated with this situation? He gives what my grandfather would call a cockamamie story about the hat ends up in the car because after they leave, his brother wants to get the hat. Now, Dave Lignale, and we'll see the phone calls later, testified to all the phone calls that happened in that Escalade. There are no phone calls between DeMarco Thompson and Derrick Thompson. What are these people doing, flagging each other down on the freeway? They are not. They have cell phones. Their cell phones found in the car, and DeMarco Thompson testified that he had a cell phone with him.
Objection. This states the evidence.
Overruled. But remember, you are to rely on your recollection of what you see and hear in the evidence.
Now, it's been testified to at different points that there's just two sets of keys to this Challenger. I assume most people here have a car or have been around a car in the modern era. Almost all cars come with two sets of keys. They're difficult to replace. Those are those keys. And his story about Derrick Thompson having the other set of keys is fully inconsistent with the prior testimony of Kenitra. It's nonsense, it's inconsistent, it is not credible. And so it goes. They leave together. And we get to the first major blind spot in this case. There's this 10.7 mile stretch. It's maybe 6 miles before we get anything on video. And the arrogance and apathy of Sergeant Ligneal led to us knowing nothing about this period. But that's where the jury instructions come in. And these jury instructions are a foundational portion of the American criminal justice system. They are what have been established to help balance out the individual here, presumed innocent, and the state with its many lawyers and its many resources, its police officers, its ability to contact federal officials, state officials. And so I think this is a good place to discuss the framework of your job. The state has accused Derrick Thompson of many crimes. The law of this country and this state say that the government, having accused someone of a crime, bears the sole burden of proving each and every element beyond a reasonable doubt. And they have to do this despite the presumption of innocence. It is your job to make that presumption of innocence not a hollow promise, not a forgotten part of the past, but a fundamental framework of what citizenry means in America. And it requires some mental gymnastics. It requires you to put the state to its burden by looking at Derrick Thompson, presuming his innocence, and saying, he didn't do this. Let's see the proof. Did they prove it? And to what degree did they prove it? Now, this comes the next vital portion of our constitutional rights when the government has accused us of crimes. They must prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. My client bears none of that burden. They have to prove it beyond any doubt based on reason. You were selected because you're reasonable people. And if you have any doubt that's based on reason, my client is not guilty. Now, these standards of proof are, I think, easiest to understand if we talk about them in the various levels of proof that we have in courthouses. The lowest is called reasonable suspicion.
Objection, improper argument about the law that the jury has not heard.
Overruled.
Reasonable suspicion is a police officer sees someone in a suspicious manner, slumped over in a doorway at 3 a.m., looking dangerous, and they can frisk them down. That is our lowest level of proof. It's basic safety checks. Then you start to talk about money. You're suing someone back and forth. It's a preponderance of the evidence. If you get to 51.1%, it's more likely than not you get the verdict in your favor. Those are important issues. That's how lawsuits are settled. But then you get to the next higher level, clear and convincing evidence. Clear and convincing evidence is the sort of evidence that we use in child custody matters, decisions related to living wills, issues related to life support. These are very important issues, but they are not the most important issues. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is the highest level of proof required under the law. The proof must convince you beyond a reasonable doubt, so you have no doubt left of the truth of the allegation that is based on reason. And again, we are entitled to the presumption of innocence, especially if the state hasn't carried its burden. And with that in mind, I want to go into this blind spot, this few miles, and talk about the most likely chain of events based on reason that led to this tragedy. We have these two young men who showed up to Hertz, again, having paid hamburger prices for a steak. He's got these keys. Those keys are found in the car. There's no other way this case makes sense unless he is in that car. The state hasn't even bothered to test those keys, hasn't even bothered to find the car to see if they go to the Challenger. The case doesn't even bother to reassess the Escalade with this in mind, which Officer Lignale testified. He was 50-50, probably preponderance of the evidence is described, that DeMarco Thompson was in this car. And let's just talk about how that changes this inexplicable situation described by the state into something, while tragic, and I will submit, while reckless, is not murder. So, here we have them again, exiting the Hertz rent-a-car. The most likely avenue to go, and you can use your reason and common sense, is on a freeway. There's stops off a freeway in between these two locations. Again, we end up in the crash with the hat, the keys in there. They're together. There's no calls between Derrick and DeMarco. They are in the car together. And then, in the most blinded version of it, failing to see what it means is different if there are two people in the car, the state introduced this as damning evidence. Now, what is this someone talking to their mom about? He was with me. This shit is crazy, Ma. Ma, could you please help me figure this out? Like, just me hearing anything would make me feel better. This isn't someone saying that, oh, I dropped my brother off right before this happened. Why didn't he get in this horrible car accident with me? It's nonsensical to think that. You wouldn't say that to your mother. What he's saying is, why did he even get fucking dropped off? Like, why did we meet up earlier and why did this whole thing happen? We were going to go rent a car. We got this really fancy car. And this all happened. That is what that shows, and it shows compelling evidence that he was with DeMarco Thompson. So now, we're at driving 6235W, 6,000-pound executive SUV. The kind of thing that you see people being driven around in on television shows when business people in the back want to talk quietly and not be disturbed. It's designed to be extraordinarily powerful. It's designed to be quiet and insulated from the outside world.
Objection. Facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
And you can use your common sense and reason based on what a Cadillac is. It's the Cadillac of whatever, to determine that that is what the likely situation inside that vehicle was. You know, brand new luxury cars based on your reason and your common sense contain all sorts of positive traction, slip differentials, whatever modern conveniences could be there. Adaptive cruise control. Lane steering you're not used to. Modern cars do things they didn't do before, and a great big new one is a thing that's very unfamiliar. Now, Mr. Paquette at one point, when discussing the vehicle, stated, great big vehicles you need a special license for. And maybe that is what the policy should be, but that was an ordinary passenger vehicle. It was 6,000 pounds, and they just handed it to him after he'd rented a sedan. And this goes into the state of mind. And that's what I propose to you is the most profound blind spot in the state's vision when they fail to investigate, when they fail to see what it means for there to be two people in this car. Because it's Friday night, it's just after 9:30, you're young and sober and headed downtown. You got the hottest ride in town. And you're talking, you're laughing. You have Kenitra on the phone who says, or is saying in a phone call she heard they were listening to loud music. Picture it. Use your reason and common sense. This isn't heartless driving. This is young, excited, reckless men. That doesn't mean you have to find it acceptable. It doesn't mean it's not reckless. So then they've entered the 94 corridor and we start to see the video. The officer testified, the accident reconstructionist testified that during this period there was a average rate of 94 miles an hour. It appears to be fairly consistent through here. This is where roughly he interacts with the police officer. Now, there's no evidence that he saw the police officer. Go back to State's Exhibit 1. Remember, they put up a picture of a cop car that didn't look anything like this cop car. They put up a picture of a car with an external top headlight system as Exhibit 1 in this case. Completely unfounded in fact. And when you look at the videos of Officer Guerra's squad pulling up, you see it's internal. This is just a car following behind. There's no evidence. There's no evidence that Mr. Thompson understood or had any idea in that vehicle that it was being followed by a police officer. And so, there. Now we're getting to where the speeds do appear to increase. He's getting over towards an exit, getting closer to downtown. At this point, the police officer, several cars behind, and he takes this exit. Now, at this point, I think it is vital in order to understand this case to watch what happens. Roughly around this period of time is the 116 miles per hour. Oops. If you watch here, this is roughly when brakes are activated. Sorry. Brake lights. And then, as you heard the crash reconstructionist testified to, there's this downslope, and then it flattens out. We talked about momentum. Momentum is this concept that great, big, heavy objects push really hard and want to keep going the same way they're going. If you've ever taken a hill in a big truck going fast, it bottoms out. And here, where this car, by the time it's slowing down because it's braking and it's trying to get to a normal rate of speed, on that, you have this two unbuckled people in the vehicle, and suddenly you're in the air. This is about 5.5 seconds from the crash itself. 5.5 seconds is an important number to keep in mind, because that's when the car is traveling consistently at the same speed, between 94 and 97 miles an hour, despite this evidence that there is a push down all the way on the accelerator. Now, if you view this as this singular, maniacal, driven person who just wants to cause mayhem and ruin the night and destroy this great vehicle that he's just received, maybe that it could be a possibility. But with these two people who are laughing and joking, having a reckless good time, but not paying attention, and suddenly they're off on this exit, and oh crap, we're in the city. You bottomed out. You're in an unfamiliar vehicle. You're trying to figure out what's going on. You can see the car sort of bob through there. And the crash. It's traveling an average of 94 miles an hour on the freeway to 38. It exits down a graded off-ramp. Appears to bottom out as the grade flattens out. The vehicle maintains 95 to 98 from the time frame of 5.5 to -1. But at 3.5, a sudden but short, heavy press on the gas pedal. And then I think the most important video, which was described by state's witnesses not very good, I think provides some of the most important evidence in the case. But I want to talk about that short jab and how it relates to the bottoming out. You've been braking, you're going down this hill, you hit it, it's an unfamiliar vehicle. You're not buckled in. You're not pushing on that to try to find the gas pedal. You're pushing on that to try and find the brake. If you're trying to gun that car, it would accelerate. But the brief pressing on that at 3.5 seconds, followed by that not being there, that is an attempt to brake. Now here's this video. While searching for the brake pedal, the driver ultimately finds that brake pedal. Now, I want you to watch this carefully. From here to here. From here to here. The brake lights illuminate well before the intersection. If you look at this, there is a brake in the apron of the sidewalk in order to get into the parking lot. The braking happens before that apron. You can look at the dashed lines. You can look at that extended solid white line. That is where that is located. Before entering the intersection, the driver of this vehicle is trying to brake. I submit to you, the recklessness happens here. And that 5.5 seconds is a misguided but earnest effort to try and gain control of this horrible situation that has been created. Now, I want to talk to you about the elements of this crime and what the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The definition of depraved mind murder is, under Minnesota law, whoever causes the death of another person by perpetrating an act imminently dangerous to others without regard to human life, but without intent to cause the death of any person, is guilty of a crime. That is a regard for human life. Negative 3.5 seconds trying to jab on that brake, that is regard for human life. This is reckless driving. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And what you see here, if you aren't haunted by, I don't think you've been paying attention. Cars are immensely dangerous. We take out 6,000-pound things and drive them around at great speeds. This is recklessness, though. This isn't a depraved act. This is not acting with indifference to life. This is recklessness, a realization of the mistake, and an inability to resolve from that mistake. Because of that, whoever's driving this vehicle is not guilty of any of the murder charges here. But now I want to get into the investigation and what it means for everything else. Now, I will submit to you that almost every police officer presented who was an initial responder to this event was acting in good faith under enormous burdens and hardships. I think it is important to value how difficult the jobs are here and seeing what's happening and hearing this shots fired call, thinking, you don't know what you're thinking. Is this like an intentional shooting? Is there more going on? Is this a terroristic act? Like, what is going on? But that doesn't absolve an hour later when you have Sergeant Ligneal just finding the things to lock down the suspect and shutting down the investigation. He's known for 7 months that he thinks that DeMarco Thompson, 50-50 at least, is in the car. And they haven't done anything to investigate that. And this is where the burdens of proof in a case become important. You aren't to consider things outside of these instructions. A vote of not guilty on a count is simply a statement that the state hasn't met its burden of proof and is required under the law. And ladies and gentlemen, we have to ask more of our government. We have to ask more of the agents who get up and testify and lie to the faces of jurors. The state has simply not investigated the case. The state simply has not eliminated doubt as to the guilt of Derrick Thompson as the driver of this vehicle. This car rolls twice and spins around. Officer Lignell, in his cuter than half testimony, acted like he didn't even know if the car spun around. And yet he's the head case agent for this entire thing. It's an outrage. And my client should be found not guilty of all charges. But no matter what, whoever is driving that car was not acting in a depraved way. Whoever is driving that car was a knucklehead and a danger and a reckless person. But ladies and gentlemen, they simply were not acting with a depraved mind. They were not acting without regard to human life. They were trying to stop. They were frail. They were not indifferent to the loss of life. You must return not guilty verdicts on the murder charges. Thank you.
Ms. Starkey, rebuttal?
Because the state bears the burden of proof in this case, I have the opportunity to respond. I know that you have been listening to people talk all morning, so I will keep it brief. A couple of things I would like to address up front. Mr. Bliss just referred to Dave Lignell as a liar, indicated that when he had the opportunity, he told an affirmative falsehood to you on the stand. You are the judges of facts in this case. There is only one person who very clearly was lying repeatedly in this case, was telling affirmative falsehoods, and was attempting to get away with murder. And that's Derrick Thompson. The notion that the state has never acknowledged the keys from the challenger This is a state's exhibit. It was placed into evidence by my colleague and the witness that was on the stand to process the vehicle. This is not a movie. Not at all. This is an exercise in attempted distraction.
Objection, burden shifting.
Sustained. You're to disregard that last statement.
You are not here to make an emotional decision. You are here to consider the facts and apply the law to those facts. And shouting and stomping of feet doesn't change that. The purpose of this investigation was to establish who was driving. Because the person who was driving spent 2 full minutes making a series of reckless and destructive choices that showed no regard for the other people on the road or the people in that busy area around Lake Street. Look at the evidence. Look at it carefully and discuss it together. A reasonable doubt is a doubt based on reason and common sense. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is not a fanciful proof beyond a reasonable doubt is not a mystical standard. It's not mysterious. It's the same burden of proof that applies in every criminal case, in every courthouse in this country from murder to parking tickets.
Objection.
Overruled.
A reasonable doubt is a doubt based on reason and common sense. So is it reasonable and consistent with your common sense that this was nothing more than a, quote, reckless good time? Is it reasonable and consistent with your common sense that this defendant doesn't know the difference between a brake and a gas pedal? There was no evidence that this vehicle was unfamiliar. He selected it. That's what the evidence was. There is no evidence that they were going downtown. Most importantly, there's no evidence that anyone besides Derrick Thompson was ever driving the Escalade. And that's what the question is. And that is what the investigation sought to determine. So is it reasonable and consistent with your common sense, based on the evidence in this case, that the defendant made, quote, an earnest effort to gain control of this horrible situation that's been created? Is that what the evidence shows? Is it reasonable and consistent with your common sense that anybody else was driving? And is it reasonable and consistent with your common sense that any of his conduct, either before or after, shows anything less than indifference to anybody besides Derrick Thompson? And if it's not reasonable and consistent with your common sense, it's because he's guilty. And we would ask that you find him so.